Michelle has her hand up. Good for you.
Yes. Good morning, Ann and everybody. Several weeks ago, you challenged me to write an op-ed about my experiences with Afghan families in San Antonio. I think like 2 or 3 days later, I was contacted by American Immigration Council with the same request. Long story short, the San Antonio Report has accepted my op-ed, so keep your eyes peeled.
Good for you.
I
Good for
know.
you. We need to, so now we're going to just challenge everybody on the screen, right,
Right,
Michelle?
exactly.
Because writing op-eds, writing the story that you know, or the story that needs to be heard, that's an important part of civic engagement.
Yes.
And it's not the thing that only other people do. We're the other people. We're the people. So let us know when that runs if we don't see it. We want to make note of that, but we need to be telling the stories that are out there and getting those stories to be heard that aren't as often heard. So thank you for doing that, Michelle.
Well, thank you for the impetus behind that.
Well, good. We're always looking for good stories, and voices have got to be heard. One announcement that I'd encourage everybody to put on their calendar. It might seem a bit down the road, but it's important. So August 25th and 26th, August 25th and 26th, that's a Friday and a Saturday, is the annual Pathways to Hope Mental Health Conference in San Antonio. It started here, and I know some of you have heard me say this before. I think it's one of the best conferences that's held in San Antonio. It's at no cost. We usually have several thousand there. San Antonians of all kinds. When you talk about sharing this story, you'll just see all sorts of people there. It's not just for, I don't know, clergy. It's not just for counselors. It's, for moms, it's for kids, and it is for clergy and counselors. And it's just the San Antonio community. It's grown though so much that this last year and now this year, it's going to 16 other cities at the same time through NAMI International. So I really encourage you to put that on your calendars. Roughly, it's like 9 to 4-ish on Friday, because we know that Friday is also a holy day in some traditions, faith traditions. And then it picks up again the next morning, 9-ish to 2 or something like that. So those are just general ballparks, but you can go ahead and look online. I don't think the registration's open yet till June 1st, something like that. But you can look for Pathways to Hope and hear more about that. Always good, always good. So I encourage you to be there. Other announcements that are happening out and about in the world. Besides, Memorial Day is just around the corner. And
hello, this is Dr. Keeley.
Hey, Dr. Keeley.
Hey, everybody. So much good stuff going on in our beautiful city. We are hosting on this Saturday from 1 to 3 the movie screening and panel discussion that I'll be moderating on Hiding in Plain Sight, a youth mental health documentary that Ken Burns put together. We're doing this in collaboration with KLRN TV, West Care, Texas, Cicada, Rise Recovery, and so many others. To register, you can go to Eventbrite and key in Hiding in Plain Sight, register, show up. Come on and have some popcorn and soda with us as we tackle this discussion for youth and parents. This Saturday, Santikos Theater Northwest from 1 p.m. to 3 p.m.
Thanks, Keely. I was wondering where it was at. And before I introduce Kerry, I want to take 2 moments. So the first moment is for Ramon Vasquez Sr. He's been a leader in our community, and he has recently passed. And so I want to take a moment there. And connected next Wednesday would be May 24th, and a year since the incident in Uvalde. And I know that there is some concern in that community about how all of that might be remembered this coming week. There's some tension. And so if we could just take a moment on those two counts, and in respect and remembrance. Losses like these impact all of us, whether we're aware of it or not, but they impact us deeply. If we feel detached, there's probably something that's happening there too that we need to pay attention to. And I think in some way, what we're hearing about this morning, moral injury, connects to deeper loss. And so I know that Chaplain Kerry Haynes is getting ready to retire soon. So we're fortunate that we're getting some of his expertise. He's probably getting hundreds of people asking him to volunteer his life away now that he's trying to take some time off. But Kerry, it's great to have you with us. And just we'd like to hear about, it came up in one of our earlier conversations about moral injury, trauma-informed care, and mental health concerns these days. And so tell us what this moral injury is about.
Yeah, thank you, Anne. I'm going to attempt to share my screen. This became a passion of mine, I guess, when I joined the VA, and folks at our national office said some chaplain needs to run with this. And I thought, why not me? That became my prayer. And that was back in 2012. And the wars were going. And so a lot of my context, of course, is veteran care. Yet, like Ann said, I think you'll find that this really crosses across every kind of civilian setting as well. Can you guys see the slides?
We can.
All right, that's me. Oh, that picture there is drawn by one of our veterans, just to try to say his wife sees him as the complete bull on the outside, but when he looks in the mirror, he sees this state of brokenness. And we have a artsy, crafty project in there that my co-facilitator, co-writer, a psychologist by the name of Patricia Pernicano, developed the cracked glass bowl to ask veterans to describe themselves at the beginning of our 12-week group as a bull, and to label the cracks. And then at the end of the group, after 12 weeks of processing, like, how am I getting better? Where do I see my life going? And it's amazing some of the ingenuity that we've seen among our veterans. Even the battle-hardened ones, you know, they'll get into make-believe and other stories that we use for illustrations. Pat used to be a child psychologist, so she has a great, rich history there. So this is just me talking, not the VA. And here's what I want to do just quickly and open it up to comments, questions. Talk about how moral injury is different. What is it? How is it different from PTSD, which most of us are familiar with? And what we do here with groups, and then address any questions or comments you have. So Jonathan Shea, a psychiatrist at the Boston VA back in the 70s and 80s, was meeting in groups with Vietnam veterans and talking about their experiences, and mentioned the stories, the narratives. And he had an open group where people could share their stories. And he developed the term moral injury back in his books written in the 80s, really comparing the Vietnam War with the earliest of wars that have been written about, the Iliad and the Odyssey adventures there. And he came up with a 3-part definition. There's a betrayal of what's right. by someone who holds legitimate authority over you. That could be a squad leader, platoon leader, someone in authority over you in a high stakes situation, such as war, or we could broaden it to such as sexual assault, or such as any kind of corporate cover-up that could cause you a loss of a job. So that was his three-pronged definition. And then in another guy from Boston, I don't know what it is with the Boston VA, but in the late 2000s, Brett Litz broadened the definition to say, what if I'm the one that betrayed my, my sense of what's right and wrong? What if I'm the one that shattered my moral compass? And Haynes there, that's me. I just like to see my name along these other great people. I just call it a wounding of the conscience, or like your moral compass has been shattered. And Ed Tick is another great writer on the subject, very holistic healer. He calls it a soul wound, like your soul has been wounded. And so it's not something lightly. It's not like, oh, my feelings got hurt. It's in the veterans we deal with, we see kind of a stuckness, an inability to move forward with their lives. Maybe they feel unforgivable. Maybe they sense someone else in their life is unforgivable. Sometimes their higher power is unforgivable. This is more from Brett Litz. As a clergyman myself, I was a pastor for about 20 years before I came to the VA. So these words of transgression, moral, ethical, that speaks to my heart. And it doesn't have to be religious beliefs. It could be culture-based, the way a person's raised, organizationally based. The military says, we're not going to leave anybody behind. We're going to bring everybody home alive. What about when that does not work out? That can weigh heavy on a conscience. Group-based rules about fairness, the value of life. And here's the problem. Wars have been so ambiguous with who is the enemy. They don't wear uniforms all the time. How inconsiderate of them. They're hiding among the civilian populace. And just yesterday, a veteran shared a story with me and a group, just how he had a very calibrated attack on the enemy combatants. And at the last minute, a child rushed into the scene. And here he is now with his own children 15 years later. And that is weighing heavily on his conscience. So there may be a time delay in there, until we find ourselves in similar circumstances. We have the most lethal weapon systems. We have this multiple launch rocket system platoon leader in one of my groups way back when. And his platoon could put thousands of rounds down range in a matter of 5 minutes. And in the first Gulf War, they didn't know what they were facing. And, they thought this was this crackpot army in front of them. And the army was on the verge of starvation in some cases. And then he would take his folks down the next day and assess for the damage and see the carnage that had been enacted on his behalf, on his command. Advances in healthcare keep us alive a lot longer to think about these things, to weigh on them. Back in the Civil War, man, if you lost a leg in combat and you made it to the medic hospital, you had a 50-50 chance of living. And most people died of infection. And so today, we keep them alive. You've seen the evidence of that. It's amazing. And yeah, that gives us more time to process and to doubt ourselves, to be angry at others. And then these deployments stacked on top of each other. In non-combat, we see any kind of broken trust in a very significant way, a betrayal of a spouse that was unexpected, or it could be a cover-up in a company like I talked about, any kind of sexual assault where the survivor, the victim, feels some guilt from themselves. We see that a lot with sexual assault survivors, and yet they also were unable to let go of this person that violated them, and they just are filled with hatred and not able to move forward with their life. So we have those folks in our groups too. I talked with a woman yesterday just like that. Here's some other examples. I mentioned some of these already. Lots of commanders and medics and senior non-commissioned officers find their ways into our groups because they couldn't bring everybody back. Any kind of violence within military ranks, we've had people open up on their own troops. Certainly we've had fratricide that's friendly fire that was not intentional too. And those kinds of things weigh heavily on the conscience. It won't become moral injury unless it feels like it's unresolvable, that little star at the bottom, an ethical dilemma or a moral conflict that it can't work through. And then afterwards, these matters of the conscience, like I said, they don't go away with time. Sometimes time makes them worse. And the veterans isolate, they use alcohol, drugs to try to numb their feelings. Sometimes suicide. I believe that our high rate of suicide among veteran population is largely due to moral injury. We haven't documented that yet with science. I just believe it's there because that conscience, and they can't find a way forward. And so these wounds lead to guilt and shame and often keep veterans away from mental health because of the shame involved. And it's often the hidden wound behind PTSD. I'll talk about how it's the same and different here. We might have the same symptoms, but for different reasons. PTSD is classically more fear-based. And so what happens is the T is trauma and post-traumatic stress. Everybody that's been through trauma, everybody has post-traumatic stress. It's going to mess with you if you've been through something traumatic, which we define as life-threatening, or you wish you were dead, like if you're being raped. Certainly, you may feel like you're about to die, or you may wish you were dead. And PTSD, then it becomes a disorder, the D, when the symptoms just don't go away after a month or longer. They just hang on. And so the trauma, it's because the trauma brain has that fight, flight, freeze response. You've probably heard those terms, fight, flight, freeze. It's our way of combating the danger around us. And if you're a believer in evolution, it goes back to the dinosaur days, this huge creature's in front of me. I'm going to run, or I'm going to do my best to hit it with a club, or I'm going to freeze and not move like the deer in the headlights. And so that's the fear-based response of PTSD. Moral injury, on the other hand, similar. 9 out of 10 of our veterans with moral injury have a diagnosis of PTSD. So it's very similar. If they don't have PTSD, they probably have anxiety or depression or substance use disorders going on in their life. And yet on the moral injury side, there's got to be a moral component, conscience component at work there. And so you can have one without the other. You can have trauma where you almost died and there was no moral question, like, was I at fault? Was someone else at fault? Does anybody know this is audience participation time. Does anybody know the leading cause of PTSD in America? The leading cause among all of America. You can unmute, or I better monitor the chat here, huh? Yeah, thank you, Joe. So true. Anybody else? Anybody want to answer? It's actually, oh, we got some answers. Let's see. Oh, yeah, I would think domestic violence. It is actually Doug Beach's answer, auto accidents, probably because of how many there are. And so the near-death experience of an auto accident leads one to have that fight, flight, or freeze response that whenever you're reminded of that accident, a trigger event, you're either brought right back into that danger, or you try to avoid it at all costs. Maybe I'm never going to drive again. And so those are all part of PTSD. So the same symptom, I may not want to go to the mall because the mall could be a dangerous place and somebody a terrorist might come out and shoot us all. That would be PTSD. Moral injury says I'm not going to go to the mall because I don't want to contaminate the human race. I am dangerous. I am evil. Or if it was a betrayal kind of moral injury, I don't want to go to the mall because I can't trust any other human being. I've been so let down. So you can see the same avoidance at work, the same isolating at home, but for different reasons. PTSD is a diagnosis, moral injury is not. And it's really hard to diagnose matters of the conscience. And in the VA, we pay you to be sick. So we have problems thinking about, are we going to pay somebody if they were the perpetrator? If they did something wrong, are we going to give them extra money? Don't get me started on paying people to be sick. That's another problem in itself. But we'll move forward there. And so here's how one Iraq combat veteran put it. PTSD is learning how to live in the world once I got back. Moral injury. is me learning how to live with myself once I got back. So you see the nuance there. A lot of Vietnam veterans had this. They just didn't know that it was called moral injury. That was a more recent term. What we do here at our VA, and we started this during COVID. You know, there are certain good things that come out of COVID. COVID hit in March of 2020, I think, at least from my memory. And we were about to finish one of our groups. And we thought, what are we going to do? So we scrambled and got everybody together on Zoom as best we could. Some people couldn't figure it out. And we had our last session on Zoom. And then we said, this is too intense of a program to do online like this. What are we going to do during COVID? It was actually one of our trainees who I later hired as staff, one of my best moves ever. But she came up with the idea of saying, why don't we do some kind of educational piece that's safe enough they can listen to, and they don't have to tell their stories on screen, and at least it'll give them something while we're waiting for 6 months for COVID to go away. You remember those thoughts? That'll be gone in a few months. And so when we started this 4-week group, and this is a free link and has the slides, and can maybe, if she has a superpower, put them in the chat or send them out to the group. But this is a link to that free curriculum. And when we first devised it, we wrote it for veterans. And I think it's doable in a way that anybody could use it in any of your houses of worship or any setting, really. And that was the intent, that this could be wider than VA. And so when you go to this link, you'll find downloadable facilitator handbook and downloadable participants handbook. And it's 4 weeks. And week 1 talks about what is moral injury, what I just talked about with you guys, 1 hour. Week 2 talks about the stages of change and how can I get motivated myself. And we say just by showing up here, you're already motivated here to want to change your life. You're already combating isolationism. You're doing something about it. This is awesome. And then weeks 3 and 4 are more heavy in content after we've developed a little bit of relationship with them. Week 3, we talk about guilt. A lot of these folks are carrying guilt that they don't really need to carry, like a survivor of sexual assault. He or she, and we've seen both, by the way, they feel guilty over that. What, I should have cried out for help. No, you were in the freeze response. I should have run for my life. No, you were in the flight response. Your trauma brain is trying to help you to survive. That's the way we're wired. So how can you carry guilt for the way your body is set up to respond to danger? So we help them process where guilt might not be helpful. A lot of people say, oh, my mission got switched and my buddy died. Yeah, but how much control did you have over that? Did you know that your buddy was going to die? No, of course not. So we help them work through those things. And then forgiveness for the part of responsibility you do carry. How can you go about forgiving self or others? And we give them suggestions. We use Everett Worthington's REACH model of self and other forgiveness with his permission. And we talk about recall the hurt, empathize with the one who hurt you, or with yourself if that's self-forgiveness. I forget what the A stands for now, but I'm on the spot here. And altruistic gift. That forgiveness is always a gift, and then commit with a ceremony or a ritual that's meaningful to you. I've got an old beat up coffee mug that I threw across the parking lot in a fit of anger. And that reminds me, I don't want to go back to that angry person. I want to let that person that I was angry at go and bless him. And then the H is hold on in rough times in your life. So we talk about that more in our 12-week group, but we introduce it, what true forgiveness is and is not, in this 4-week group. And so if nothing else, that might be your something that you could really use. I don't know. And here's what we do in the 12-week group. It's optional, of course. Nobody has to come to any of these groups. Co-led. Our 4-week groups are led by chaplains just because we don't have enough mental health providers lined up. Anybody can lead the 4-week group. Any of you could do it if you wanted to. The 12-week group is more therapeutic. It's not open to the market like the 4-week is for free. And it is co-led by a mental health provider and a chaplain, because we believe moral injury is a mental, psychological illness, and it's also a spiritual illness. And chaplains in the VA, like many of you, are working in multi-religious settings, and that's okay. That's okay. Or no religion at all. We've had lots of atheists in our groups and folks that are not sure if they're an atheist or not, and we do very well with them. And so we do use the impact of the trauma in safe ways to talk about it, like with this bowl. This is a picture of a bowl in the kintsugi or kintsukori tradition, that the gold actually becomes part of the beauty in Japanese pottery as it fills in all the cracks. And we suggest to them, your bowl, as broken as it is, that's you right at the beginning. But over time through the group, we say at the end, show us your bowls that are starting to heal. And they come up with amazing symbolism and beauty. And one brought a real bowl in that he had crashed and put back together. And it's just amazing, their creativity. And we say that the patched up bowl could be more beautiful than the beginning bowl in some ways. And you've got the ability to help others that we don't have any way of helping ourselves. You know, I've never been sexually assaulted, and yet someone who has can help someone that's survived that. We help them with other exercises with responsibility pie, writing a letter to themselves from someone that they look up to, either their God figure or maybe their sergeant major or their husband or wife or someone that loves them unconditionally. And so that's a little project they do and share it with each other. We do some forgiveness work in that 12-week group, some self-acceptance, moving towards wholeness and healing. And then giving back projects, what we call making amends along the 12-step tradition. And whether you were hurt or whether you hurt others, we talk about how can you use your story to make the world a better place. And then that post-traumatic growth and hope for the future. I'm running out of time. These comments you can read later. They like it, and it helps a lot in ways that our traditional therapies for PTSD do not help. And these are some sites across the VA world that have been involved in moral injury work. These sites in the pink, and that was us right here when we developed ours. There's about 6 groups now that are having their curriculum published across the VA, and ours is one of them. And then it's being broadcast to these other sites just to spread it across the VA. And we've also, this website down here would be great for clergy if you want to know more about veterans and how to partner with mental health folks in your community, like Ann was talking about Pathways to Hope. And so this is a VA website that anybody could go to. IMH stands for Integrative Mental Health, and what they're integrating in is the chaplaincy component. And they've got some great resources, some videos for pastors, some other things in there that I would really recommend to you. And that's all I have. So I'm going to turn it over to Ann, and I haven't really looked at the chat much. Sorry, I got busy.
Well, you can scroll through it. We're going to take just a little pause because we're right at 8:28. And so for those of you who may need to leave us at 8:30 because you have maybe other meetings, thanks for being with us this morning. We're going to continue in a bit with some conversational Q&A. I do want to mention next week, Eric Cooper with the San Antonio Food Bank is going to bring the briefing about the upcoming farm bill. One of the things that he told me, I had no idea, but for every meal that the food bank provides in San Antonio, there are 9 meals provided by SNAP,
Wow.
the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program. And so this farm bill directly impacts those 9. So I want to learn and need to learn more about what that means. So next week it's going to be on the farm bill. So Kerry, I remember the first time I heard about moral injury. One, I was immediately drawn. My father served in the big one, and he shot the big guns and suffered from nightmares, and he died at 90. So for a long time, he suffered at that. And but it took years before he could really express what it did to him inside. It wasn't just, it was the moral injury. I never had words for that. And you talk about like forgiveness and that part of the healing work. But I also, and I want to ask you to say more, because one thing I remember was something about like collective ritual. You know, there's another type of healing that is helpful.
Yeah.
And it's really weird because my dad went on one of those trips, day trip to Washington, D.C., where they would take veterans from World War II. And oddly, I think after he came back, that ritual, if you would, of coming together, there was something that something happened for the better good. And so his like last year or two, he was really a different person. There was something there. Could you say more about that? Because I'm stumbling around it. So
Yeah, I know. And I thank you for remembering that. And in our groups, we say that moral injury happened in a community context. You didn't have that alone. And so we want to pursue healing in a community context, like in a group. Some veterans say, oh, I don't want to go to a group. And we do our best to get them there. And so in the group around sessions 7 and 8 out of 12, they actually tell one story. And we limit it and we have it highly structured. Like what was your life like before? What happened to you? What was your life like afterwards? And by the time they get there, they've already written those components in many homework assignments beforehand. And so they share their story. And then the group affirms them, kind of like a responsive reading for this old Baptist guy. But the group affirms them with a short reading that says, you are a person of worth. You are worth forgiveness, for yourself or for others. And we make that, broad enough that it's going to cover any story. And then the person who shared their story has written down a couple of words about it on a piece of paper that we've sent them in the mail. It's actually flash paper. And we asked them to put it in a cup of warm water and stir it, and it dissolves. And it's amazing. The first time somebody does it in group, it's like, whoa. And I'm even getting goosebumps thinking about it, just the dissolving of the words that represent my story, that I'm letting it go, I'm lifting it up. And then it's funny to me that the veterans who have just seen it, they go next and share their story, and they're like, whoa, as well, even though there was no surprise. It's that same factor, just a little ritual. One of the groups in a different VA does a stone, and they write something symbolic on the stone, and they have a beautiful pond outside, and they throw it into the pond and let it sink and go away. And one of our stories talks about forgiveness pond, but it's a ritual of letting go. One of the virtual groups I was doing, the guy didn't have flash paper, or he forgot it, left it at home, he was at work. We're like, go grab a piece of toilet paper. And so he wrote it down on toilet paper and went and flushed it. So, whatever works. It was just like letting it go. And so it's incredible. There was some psychological theory about this unconditional positive regard. That was Rogers, I believe. Some of you know this better than me, but Rogers named that. And so that's what we challenge the groups to be. I always say, this is Planet Fitness here, judgment-free zone. We are not going to judge each other. We're going to love each other no matter what story is shared. We're going to accept each other. And it's amazing. The groups have never failed to step up to the plate and do that for each other. It's a very holy or sacred moment when that happens in the groups. So I think that's what you're talking about.
yeah, Lori Packard mentioned in the chat that perhaps there's a connection of moral injury with folks who've been injured in their own religion or faith tradition.
I got my own church trauma going on here. And that's part of why I came over to the VA. It's like 19 years. I can't do this. But absolutely, Lori, any sense of betrayal could leave a deep wounding of moral injury. So that's a great example.
Yeah, there's one gathering of folks in San Antonio. It's called Celebration Circle. But when I go there, I often think it's where people go who've been injured from other religions and tradition, but they come together, and it very much is a healing circle in a sense, but they also celebrate life. So I don't know if it was ever set up intentionally that way, but when you go and you see all the different people from all the different religions, and you hear all the stories, we all know telling the story is a part of the process. So other comments. Go ahead.
Let me mention one other thing. And part of our reading also acknowledges that the larger community sent you to war. And so they're part of your moral injury.
Ooh.
And I would say that to all of us here as people of faith, that it's not just the veterans to carry alone. And I commend you whenever you're able to reach out to a veteran and love them unconditionally and not ask them how many people they killed. You know, they don't like those kind of questions, but just love them for who they are. And it's part of our society. It's part of our political process that sent them off to war. And we got that wrong in Vietnam. And I think because of that, we're starting to fix it back here with the gratitude for our current veterans, our younger veterans. Thanks.
That's powerful. Other comments, thoughts, questions? Just open your mic.
Paul mentioned police officers,
Yeah.
first responders.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely.
Yeah, let me comment on that. For 8 years, I was with the San Antonio Police Department as a program manager. But every 1 week out of every 3, 24 hours, 24/7, I was on call along with 2 psychologists for any officer-involved shootings. That's an example that strongly supports what Chaplain Haynes has been saying. Before the police realized the importance of getting a chance to talk out the experience, they would just take their the gun away and seated them at a desk, and they waited until the DA decided whether or not there was a need to pursue that. Well, the proportion of officers during that era, 80% never stayed through retirement. They committed suicide, had horrible family problems, drank themselves into into the bottle, and so forth. When the police began to recognize that, they changed the requirements so that across the country, officers who were involved with shootings were required to talk with a mental health person and a chaplain as soon as possible after the incident. And so we were often called within an hour of the incident, drove down 281 with no traffic, because so often it was 2:30 in the morning, and we would talk with the officers, taking no notes and focusing not on the righteousness of the incident, but on how they felt. And every one of them, the dozen that I spoke with during the 8 years, felt a tremendous amount of guilt. And so my job then was to make sure that they had someone, a clergy person, a priest, a minister, a rabbi, or a trusted family member with whom they could talk about the tremendous guilt that they felt about having shot someone and either wounding or killing them. What again, Chaplain Haynes is saying just applies very strongly to police officers. And what's important is that now we are looking at the importance of police officers not taking advantage of what they're doing, and we have to be very careful, because again, the guilt is still there. But again, it's different from whether or not it was a so-called righteous shooting.
Yeah, thank you, Paul. I think about firefighters too, with just seeing human life destroyed messes with them sometimes. And firefighter, I was a fire department chaplain back in the day, and fire and police, they're such hardened people. They don't want to show any weakness at all, just like veterans sometimes. And you just be there with them and let them know that you care about them. And eventually it brings down walls.
I think we have time for one more question or comment. There's so many good things in chat. I'm trying to think even of a ritual we can do here, because there's so many people, I think, who are connecting to this in one way or another, through their work or a family member. And even carrying that,
Secondary.
Could,
Reverend.
Chaplain Haynes, could you put the link to that that you posted earlier? Could you put
Yeah,
that in the
I'll put
chat?
it back in there. Thank you.
Thank
thank you.
It was Paul that put that in there, but I'll put it again. Or Thomas put it in.
I guess I thank you, Kerry, for putting a name to it. I met a random gentleman at a campsite one time who had a veteran's hat on, and I thanked him for service, and he immediately told me about survivor's guilt. He was in intelligence in the Vietnam War, and he came back when most of his friends didn't, and I think he could have benefited from a conversation like this to put a name to it so that you can wrap it up and flush it. I think it would have helped him.
We've had some Intel people in our groups. I used to be an Intel guy in the Army way back when too. And just one guy that was developing agents in another country. And over time, those agents got exploited and sometimes died for what they were doing and they're, to serve our US means. So Intel, drone warfare, where people were fighting a war and then they go home with their families at night for dinner, from San Antonio even. So all these nuances. Anybody else?
So, Kerry, thank you for being with us today. When's your date of retirement?
31st of this month.
31st of this month.
Yeah, Ann and I met way back when at Haven for Hope.
Yeah,
I remember
way
you did
back.
a great tour.
Back in the day. I always
Back
want
in
to
the
know what
day.
that means, back in the day. But there's one, back in the day at Haven for Hope. But
And then she became famous.
yeah, right. So, but Kerry, thank you for your service.
You're welcome. Yeah, it's my pleasure.
This kind of work and being in the midst of it for as long as you have. So thank you for us and for those who have served directly. And when you are ready to volunteer, we got work to do. So
Okay.
just, how to get in touch with me.
Thank you.
All right. We'll see you all next week. Have great weekends. And next week, we'll be talking about the food bill with Eric Cooper. I don't know about you, but I can listen to Eric Cooper talk all day long. So take care.